Section 3 of this chapter, Mediated Interpersonal Communication, deals with the concept of competence in mediated communication. Very often you ask yourself, what are my options? Which one is best suited for me to communicate my idea in this situation? How can I use this approach in a very skillful way, in a way that is effective, in a way that accomplishes my intended purpose? So, competent mediated communication has its own set of principles. The first one is consider the channel or channels. Which one is best? Video chat, texting, email, social media, face-to-face? And of course, the answer depends. So here are some channel attributes to consider when making your choices. First is richness. Social scientists use the term richness to describe the abundance of nonverbal cues that add clarity to a verbal message. Leanness, on the other hand, describes messages that carry less information and mostly due to a lack of nonverbal cues. So, face-to-face communication certainly is profuse with nonverbal messages that give communicators the meaning or the information that leads to meaning itself. By comparison, most mediated channels are somewhat leaner. There are times when a leaner message or a lean message is the best route to take. Maybe you don't want the person who's hearing your message to hear the quiver in your voice or see the sweat on your forehead or maybe even notice the clothing that you're wearing. So lean messages communicate less about, not only less information, but also less information about the person that is communicating, less of their personal features. One study found that text-only format of most online messages can really bring people closer by minimizing some of the perception of difference that comes due to gender difference, social class differences, race differences, ethnicity differences, and of course, age differences. So when you want people to focus on what you are saying rather than your appearance, then leaner communication will probably work best. On the other hand, leaner channels can make it harder to interpret a message with confidence. So richer channels like video conferencing are associated with less interpersonal distress than leaner channels like text-based social media. The leanness of some mediated messages also presents another problem, especially when communicators don't know each other. Without nonverbal cues, online communicators can create an idealized and sometimes unrealistic image of one another. So the absence of nonverbal cues allows communicators also, on the other hand, to manage their identity very carefully. It's a world without bad breath, unsightly blemishes, or even some stammering responses. So such conditions encourage participants to engage in what scholars call hyper-personal communication. And this is where they accelerate the discussion of personal topics and relational development beyond what normally happens in face-to-face interaction. So, online communicators self-disclose at higher rates, share more emotions than they would in person, and this often can lead to hastened, maybe a premature sense of relational intimacy. So the best way to avoid getting catfished is to demand communication through richer channels such as synchronous video chatting. So synchronicity is another concept. Communication that occurs in real time is synchronous. So that is an in-person conversation. By contrast, asynchronous communication occurs when there's a lag between receiving and responding to a message. So voicemail messages are asynchronous. The asynchronous nature of most mediated messages make them fundamentally different from face-to-face synchronous communication. An asynchronous message gives you the choice of not responding at all. You can ignore certain social media posts, and very often there's very little fallout to you ignoring it. But you can't ignore somebody if they call you or they confront you in person. Asynchronous channels give you a chance or the opportunity to edit your reply. You can mull over the wording, ask advice about what to say. So asynchronous channels offer a less risky method of communicating than having to speak on your feet, so to speak, or to come up with immediate answers. On the other hand, delaying a response can send a message of its own, intentionally or not. The other person might be wondering, I wonder why he or she hasn't texted me back. Asynchronous communication can be useful when emotions run high. You don't feel compelled to respond immediately, and you don't feel you're not responding from emotion, whether it's anger or disgust. You can read and possibly reconsider what you've written before saying something that might make things worse. Asynchronous channels can also be a good way to apologize. You can search for the right words without having to confront that person, and you can respond to them later. There's a delay in responding. Permanence. What happens in a face-to-face conversation is transitory, unless, of course, it's recorded, either video or audio. By contrast, text, photos, and video can be stored indefinitely and forwarded to others. So there can be a downside to the enduring nature of digital messages. It's bad enough to blurt out a private thought or lash out in person, but at least there's no permanent record of your indiscretion. By contrast, a regrettable text message, email, or web posting can be archived virtually forever. Some mediated platforms are designed to thwart message permanence. Snapchat, of course, is the most popular of these limited time instant messaging services. So most people think and are quick to assume that the richer, the more synchronous and less permanent channels are ideal in all situations because they more closely resemble face-to-face communication. Well, different situations and communicators call for different approaches. So be careful what you post. Many users post text and images about themselves that could prove embarrassing in some contexts. So the impulsive message or post that seems harmless at the moment can haunt you for a lifetime. Respect privacy boundaries. It's usually fine to repost or retweet or otherwise share mass personal messages that are clearly aimed at large audiences, but respect other people's privacy. It's easy to imagine how offended and angry someone would be if their personal emails and texts went viral. So if in doubt, it's always best to ask the sender whether it's okay to share a message. Keep your tone civil. It can be easier to behave badly when the target of your message isn't in front of you. So the tendency to transmit messages without considering the consequences is called disinhibition. Disinhibition is far more likely in mediated channels than in face-to-face contact, and also when it's written anonymously. So one way to better behave online is to ask yourself a simple question before you send, post, or broadcast. Would you deliver the same message to the recipient in person? If your answer is no, then you might want to think twice before sending. Consider the communicators and environment. Communication isn't all about you. It's necessary to think about crafting messages that will be well received by the other parties. So the context in which you're communicating also matters. So consider the receiver's preference. Your best chance of being heard will come from choosing the channels preferred by the people that you're trying to reach. So the best thing to do is to use what is referred to as multimodality, the ability and willingness to use multiple channels of communication. It's smart to analyze your audience and adapt to their channel preferences before communicating. In your analysis, consider not only demographic variables such as age, but also message content. As a rule of thumb, if it's serious and complex, if these are serious and complex topics, they demand richer channels such as face-to-face communication. Most people say that they prefer personal and substantive conversations to be handled in person, face-to-face. In the office, email is still the preferred channel. Attempting to communicate professionally via texting or social media could be a breach of professional etiquette. It's smart to match the amount of information you send with the preferences of the people you want to reach. So here's a general rule. People expect you to match the amount and depth of communication they provide, what is referred to as reciprocity. Social media users who actively provide a lot of likes and reactions to posts expect the same to their own posts. Respect others' need for undivided attention. You might not realize that people are insulted when you divide your time between your in-person conversational partner and distant contacts via your cell phone. The mere presence of a mobile device can have a negative effect on closeness, connection, and conversation during face-to-face discussion of personal topics. People can feel fubbed, feeling snubbed by another's phone use. Be mindful of bystanders. Sometimes the use of communication technology annoys others in public spaces, and you've been annoyed, and so have I. Balance mediated and FaceTime. Mediated interpersonal communication resembles face-to-face interaction in many ways, but it's also very different. So balance the two in order to be an effective communicator.